Well now, dear friends, pull up a chair and let me share a memory that's been tugging in my heart these late evenings. I'm just an old gentleman with a few more years behind me than ahead, and my name is Frank Matthews, though most folks round here just call me Grandpa Frank. Tonight, I want to take you back to a July night in West Virginia, 12 years ago, when the air smelled of scorched cedar and old vines, and the world I'd built in that creaky farmhouse nearly went up in flames. You see, I was sitting on the porch, rocking gently in my chair, a mason jar of sweet tea resting on the rail, when a gust of wind stirred a scent that felt more like yesterday than any moment I've lived since. My mind drifted to the day I married my beloved June, to the laughter that echoed through those halls, to the laughter of our children as they tumbled through the yard. But on that night, it wasn't laughter I heard. It was the crackling of betrayal, soft at first, then growing louder, a sound I can't shake even now. About 20 seconds in, if you're finding this story worth your time, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd tap that like button, maybe drop a comment, and, well, consider subscribing for more tales from these old bones. Forgive that little aside, just a humble request, from my heart to yours, so more curious souls like you can join me in these recollections. Anyway, where was I? Ah yes, the flicker of flame at the edge of the kitchen window, the glow creeping along the walls like a hungry creature. My heart pounded so fiercely I thought it might burst right there on the floorboards. You might wonder how a man of my age escaped such terror. Truth is, I stumbled down into the old wine cellar, that narrow tunnel cut beneath the hearth, and crawled through a gap I'd never bothered to clean out, figured no one would ever need it again. But that night, that forgotten escape hatch became my lifeline. And all the while, I could hear the fire roaring above, see the orange swirl press against the cellar walls, and feel that cruel reality. My own children wanted me gone. It's a confession no father should ever utter, yet here I stand, 12 years and countless shadows later, still feeling that prick in my chest every time July rolls around. I reckon I've told a handful of folks that the wiring must have gone bad, that the flames were just an accident. But private, late at night, as the sky deepens to indigo and cicadas hum, I whisper the truth to the stars: blood doesn't guarantee love. And the house that held my family nearly held me in its fiery grip forever. So here I am, in this dusty trailer by the Alabama River, carrying that weight and wondering if you feel it too, if you've ever known someone you loved to turn against you, if you've ever smelled smoke and realized it wasn't from the hearth you tended. That, dear friends, is why this story still lives in my chest, why it won't let me rest until I share it with you. Back when I was a young buck just finding my footing in this world, life moved at a different pace, slower, gentler, and wrapped in endless summer evenings that smelled of honeysuckle and fresh-turned earth. I was 22, freshly married to my June, and we lived in a modest clapboard house on the edge of a small West Virginia town where everybody knew your name and your business, whether you wanted them to or not. Mornings began with the rooster's crow and the hiss of coffee on the stove, June humming softly by the sink as she flipped eggs in that old cast-iron skillet we still have tucked away. There was a rhythm to our days. I'd head down to Mr. Fletcher's farm to help with the harvest, picking tomatoes, hauling baskets of beans, while June tended her flower beds and kept the house spotless, humming hymns my mama taught her when she was just a schoolgirl. On Sundays, we'd dress in our Sunday best and make the quarter-mile stroll to the little white church atop the hill, voices rising in hymns that spoke of grace and forgiveness. I believed in kindness then, believed that good deeds passed from one heart to another like a warm quilt, hatching over life's rough edges. My dreams felt as boundless as the sky above those rolling hills. I pictured a life where June and I raised a big family in that house, where laughter spilled down the hallways, where each December brought a Christmas tree heavy with homemade ornaments and the smell of cinnamon buns wafting from the oven. I fancy that if you treated folks right, the world would treat you right in return, that neighbors would help when the barn door jammed, that children would remain faithful, and that love was as dependable as the sunrise. Evenings were spent rocking on the porch, June's head on my shoulder, talking about the future, her soft voice weaving stories of grandchildren, my rougher tones promising security and warmth for our little clan. Those were simple times, stitched together with hard work and honest smiles, where every face carried a memory and every handshake meant something. I was neither naive nor foolish. I'd seen hardship in my own boyhood, watched my pa struggle through the depression, tend to his land until his fingers cracked and bled, yet still find time to tuck me into bed with a story about better days ahead. From him, I learned that character was forged in fire, and that home was never just four walls and a roof. It was the hearts within. Back then, June and I didn't own much beyond that house, a rusted Chevy in the barn, and a few head of cattle, but to us, we had the world. I believed our bonds were eternal. I believed blood meant everything. If someone told me one day my own children would turn those beliefs to ash, I'd have laughed it off as nonsense. But here we are, me sitting in this trailer by the river in Alabama, thinking back to that hopeful young man who loved without reservation, who tied his dreams to a woman's laughter and a homestead's promise. I can still see the sun setting behind the orchard, painting the sky in strokes of pink and gold, hear the cicadas humming their evening song. I can almost taste June's blackberry pie cooling on the sill. In those days, I never imagined a world where trust could crack like old plaster, or where the ones you carried in your arms might one day bear you ill will. No, I believed that kindness was a currency more valuable than gold, that family ties were unbreakable, and that love would always find its way home. How painfully sweet that innocence feels now, knowing what I know, feeling every memory like a soft ache in my chest. Yet without that foundation of hope and faith, I might never have found the strength to crawl through that narrow wine cellar tunnel to taste freedom again. It was those gentle beginnings, that unwavering belief in goodness, that taught me how to endure betrayal and to still look back with a tender heart, even when the world showed its darker side. It was a bright spring afternoon when everything shifted, though at the time I could never have guessed it. I was leaning against the white picket fence that framed a churchyard, brushing stray bits of hay from my denim shirt after helping old Mrs. Carmichael in her barn when I first saw her, June Garrett, barefoot in a faded sundress, picking wild violets at the edge of the yard. I remember that moment clear as a bell, the way the sunlight danced across her hair, soft as summer straw, and the gentle curve of her smile when she looked up and caught my eye. I couldn't explain why my heart beat faster that instant, or why the scent of those violets seemed to settle deep in my chest and stay there. I'd known plenty of women, of course, girls from Sunday school, neighbors' daughters at county fairs, but none had ever stirred something inside me like that. She nodded politely, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and I tipped my hat, nearly losing my balance in the rush of air that filled my lungs. I managed a crooked grin and mumbled something about the weather, though really I was thinking about how her laughter sounded like a gentle stream over smooth stones. That small exchange, barely 10 words between us, felt heavy with promise, as though the world had paused and invited me to step into a new chapter. Not long after, I found myself volunteering at every church event just to catch a glimpse of her, offering to haul chairs, wash pots, and sweep floors, all under the pretense of serving my faith. In truth, I was serving something far more precious, a longing I couldn't yet name. I'd hear her humming hymns as she wiped down the wooden pews, catch the soft brush of her fingers against the hymnals, and I'd swear I'd never known Real peace until that moment. One Sunday, after service, she handed me a folded piece of paper, a note she'd scribbled in her neat handwriting, inviting me to help her father plant tomatoes in his garden. My palms went slick with sweat as I accepted it, thinking I must look like a fool, but couldn't bring myself to care. When I arrived at the Garrett home, we worked side by side in the red clay, dirt under our nails, talking quietly about dreams, hers of traveling to the coast, mine of settling down with a family just like the one I'd grown up in. The sun dipped low behind the hills as we finished, and she pressed a warm hand to mine in thanks. I felt an electric pulse leap through my veins, and something deep inside me whispered that life would never be the same. That unexpected spark of connection sent my mind spinning in directions I'd never explored. I found myself writing letters, not just to June, but to my own self, trying to capture the wonder of meeting another soul who saw the world in shades I'd never noticed. I began to notice the way the wind rustled through the apple orchard by our house, the rich hum of bees drifting by our elbows as we tended the garden together. I'd pause on my way home just to watch the lantern-like glow in the evening gloom, thinking of her soft silhouette in the kitchen doorway. I'd never been much for romantic notions, grew up learning that work and faith were the pillars of a good life, but this felt different, as if love itself had knocked on my door and invited me in. In those days, I believed that the simple act of caring for another person could transform you utterly, and I was right. June's presence unraveled parts of me I didn't know existed, hope that felt daring, joy that felt boundless, and a willingness to dream in colors brighter than the dust and sweat of a farmer's day. Looking back now, I see that meeting her was the hinge upon which my life swung. It was the moment I discovered that even a heart weathered by hardship could blossom, and that when you least expect it, a stranger's kindness can become the fire that lights your path. I hadn't yet imagined the trials ahead, how hard it would be to trust, how deeply betrayal could cut. But in that stolen afternoon among the wild violets, I learned that there was a force in this world stronger than fear, the promise of something new, of a shared life seated in tenderness, and the brave, foolish hope that grows when two people open themselves to each other for the very first time. I reckon the first real tremor came when my daughter Emma mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that I ought to consider selling the farmhouse and moving into that retirement community down by the river. It was a spring afternoon, birds singing in the eaves and the scent of lilacs drifting through the open window, and her words cut sharper than I expected. I stared at her over the rim of my coffee cup, my hands trembling just a bit, and I felt a knot tighten in my chest, part anger, part fear, part something I couldn't name. For 30 years, that house had been my anchor, the place where June's laughter still echoed in the hallways, where I'd raised 3 children and tucked them in at night, where the walls held every whisper of joy and sorrow I'd ever known. But Emma, with her polite smile and practical plans, saw nothing but an asset to be liquidated, a burden to be shifted. My oldest boy, Nathan, was off in Ohio, visiting only on holidays and never quite understanding the life I'd built here. Tommy, the youngest, had his own demons and debts, and though he dropped by sometimes, his eyes always flicked to the furniture, the acreage, the value of everything I'd spent a lifetime preserving. No one really stood beside me in that moment. Each had their own argument, their own justification, and I felt the walls closing in. I'd never felt so lonely. That night, I sat on the porch with my hands around a cold mason jar of sweet tea, the sky turning from rose to indigo, and I caught myself whispering to the wind, "This was our home, not your currency." Shame washed over me, shame that I'd let my own flesh and blood corner me into a decision I wasn't ready to face, shame that I felt tears welling up in my eyes like a child caught in a storm. Inside, a ferocious debate raged. Do I stand my ground and risk fracturing a family bond that, in better days, seemed indestructible? Or do I yield, sell the walls that held my memories, and retreat to a smaller space where no one can lay claim to what they never truly built? I felt the weight of their expectations pressing down, and it made my bones ache. Society tells us that as we age, we're meant to relinquish our independence, to step aside gracefully for the next generation. But how do you reconcile that with the ache in your heart that says this very independence is the sum of who you are? I couldn't sleep that night. The old boards creaked under my weight when I finally crawled into bed, and I lay awake imagining the movers packing up my life, box by box, the scent of old wooden memories slipping away. Fear twisted in my gut, fear that by giving in, I'd lose more than a building. I'd lose a part of myself. By standing firm, I risked alienating the children whose love I'd once taken for granted. I remember thinking, between ragged breaths, that if June were here, she'd know the answer. Kindness tempered with courage, a steady heart that refuses to bend under pressure. But without her steady hand on my shoulder, I felt adrift. It was in that turmoil, when anger, sorrow, and fear collided, that I realized this conflict was more than bricks and mortar. It was a reckoning of what home truly means, and whether a man can survive the heartbreak of realizing those he trusted most might not trust him in return. I remember that night like it was carved into my bones. The moment the first spark flared in the kitchen window, time itself seemed to hesitate, like the old grandfather clock in the hall had paused mid-tick, holding its breath. I was reading by lamplight in the living room, my spectacles slipping down my nose, when I smelled smoke. At first, I thought it was the chimney, maybe a clump of soot dislodged on a drafty night. Then I heard the soft crackle, quiet at first, but growing, insistent. When I stepped into the hallway, the glow from the kitchen was enough to paint the walls in orange shadows. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. I called out, "Children, what's—" But the words died on my lips. There was no answer, only the whoosh of flame lapping at old pine cabinets, the wood hissing as it surrendered to heat. In that instant, everything split open. I dropped my lamp, its glass chimney shattering, and I saw them. Tommy standing by the stove, his face pale in the firelight, eyes wide and unseeing. Emma lingering in the doorway, her arms crossed, as though waiting to see how it would all play out. My chest felt hollow, as though someone had scooped out the part of me that believed in family. I wanted to scream, to rush forward and grab Tommy's arm, to shake Emma from her silence, but my legs wouldn't move. The shock froze me for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Then instinct kicked in. I stumbled backward, tripping over the rug, and landed against the wall that opened onto the cellar staircase. The fire's roar chased me upstairs, behind me, and I felt the heat like a living thing, pressing against my back, demanding I flee. I don't recall thinking, only moving. My hands fumbled along the banister, my ears ringing with the crack of burning timber and my own ragged breathing. Down those steps I flew, heels scraping wood, until the musty air of the wine cellar swallowed me whole. It was dark, cramped, and I landed on my hands and knees among the dusty jars of pickles and preserves. I felt something inside me break, my certainty, my trust, the deep, unshakable belief that love kept you safe. I crawled toward that narrow slot in the stone wall, the one I'd always meant to seal up but never did. My hand slipped on damp brick as I squeezed through, and I heard the crash of collapsing beams above. The gasp escaped me, part fear, part relief, when I found daylight through that slit and tumbled onto the cool earth outside. I lay there for a long time, watching sparks drift skyward like dying fireflies, and I understood something terrible and irrevocable. I had lost more than a home. I had lost the innocence of believing blood alone could bind. The house blazed behind me, its walls buckling and windows glowing, bearing witness to the night my children became strangers. I cried then, not for the building, though a lifetime of memories burned inside those boards, but for the man I used to be, who thought love was unbreakable. In that ember-lit yard, my hands still trembling, I realized that survival demanded more than breath. It demanded a new faith, a harder wisdom forged by betrayal. From that night on, I was never the same. The kindness I'd worn like a cloak fell threadbare. The laughter that once came easy now carried an edge of warning. I learned to measure my trust in the silence of absence and to find comfort in my own company. The scars on my hands, where I scraped my knuckles on the cellar stones, reminded me daily that life can shift in a heartbeat, that the ties we think unbreakable can snap under the weight of greed. And yet, I carried on, because what choice did I have? In the ashes of my old life, I discovered a stubborn ember of hope, too stubborn to die. I promised myself I'd tell this truth, no matter how painful, to remind anyone who hears it that sometimes the greatest trial is not the fire itself, but the betrayal that lights it. And surviving that, well, that changes you in ways you never saw coming. In the days and weeks after that fire, I felt as though I were moving through water, every step heavy, every breath a labor, and the world around me muted, as if someone had turned down the volume on life itself. I left the ashes of my home behind, watched the charred beams collapse into embers, and felt my own heart settle into the rubble with them. In the hush that followed, I wound up in this little trailer by the Alabama River, trading the wide rooms of that farmhouse for one cramped space where every creak and groan of the walls felt like an echo of the past. I spent mornings staring out the window at the water's surface, its gentle current flowing without care, and wondered why the world didn't stop for me the way it had stopped that night 12 years ago. I'd lost more than a house. I'd lost the person I thought I was, the man who believed in the unbreakable bond of family, who trusted that blood and love stood as shields against the cruelties of the world. After the fire, I carried the cold taste of betrayal in my mouth, and it lingered through every meal, every conversation, Every quiet moment of the day, I tried to fill the silence with radio hymns, with a distant hum of traffic, but nothing could mask that emptiness. I'd stand at the edge of the riverbank, hands shoved deep in the pockets of my worn coat, listening to the water slip over rocks, and I'd realize I didn't even know who I was anymore. My faith in people felt like a fragile thread, barely holding, fraying at the edges, and I doubted I'd ever weave it whole again. Sometimes I'd imagine June standing beside me, reminding me that hope can rise from ashes, but I'd catch myself before I spoke her name out loud, afraid of filling the trailer with ghosts. Nights were the hardest. The ceiling fan would spin overhead, and in the hush between its blades, I'd hear the crackle of flames and the echo of my children's silence. I'd whisper into the darkness I was here, as though asserting my existence could stave off the loneliness. Friends from my old town called now and then, their voices gentle but distant, like echoes from a life that no longer belonged to me. They'd ask how I was holding up, and I'd say I was managing, but I wasn't sure managing was enough to keep a man alive. My routine became a series of small tasks: fixing the trailer's leaky faucet, tending a tiny vegetable patch out back, writing letters I never sent to Nathan, pleading for understanding I wasn't sure he had. Those letters stayed in the drawer, each page a testament to my fear of being ignored again. I found myself scrubbing the floors until my hands ached and humming lullabies to myself, as though cleanliness could wash away the taint of betrayal. And yet, in that quiet, I discovered a different kind of strength, a steady, unassuming resilience that didn't roar but simply persisted. I learned that life after loss isn't about reclaiming the old world but building something new from its fragments. Slowly, I began to plant seeds in the little garden: tomatoes, cucumbers, a single sunflower facing east, and felt the flicker of purpose each time a sprout broke the soil. I greeted neighbors with a nod and a measured smile, but kept my distance, afraid to let anyone in too close. My faith in humanity had been shaken, but I realized that trust is something you rebuild one brick at a time, and it starts with small gestures: watering a plant, fixing a loose board, offering a pot of soup to a passing stranger. I allowed myself to feel the cold emptiness, to sit with it on the back porch as the sun doused the sky in rose and gold, and learned that pain can be a companion rather than a prison if you make space for it. I may never fully recover the man I was that summer morning before the fire, but in this silence, I found a quieter truth: that survival is not just about breath and blood, but about learning to find warmth in the chill, to listen for hope in the hush, and to believe, even so, that life can still surprise you with small miracles of growth. I'll never forget the morning I found myself pausing at the edge of the riverbank, hands shoved into the pockets of my threadbare jacket, watching a pair of college kids trying to free a duckling tangled in fishing line. Normally, I'd have kept walking, kept my distance, as I learned to do, but something about that tiny creature's soft chirps reached into a corner of my soul I thought had long since sealed shut. So I stepped forward, dirt crunching under my boots, and knelt beside them. My old hands moved carefully as I cut the line away, feeling a spark of purpose ignite in my chest for the first time in years. The duckling nuzzled into my palm, and the kids looked at me with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Two college students who'd heard the rumors of the grumpy ex-farmer down the road, but found only an old man whose touch was gentle as spring rain. "Thank you, sir," one of them said, eyes full of that eager hope I'd almost forgotten existed. As I watched the birds swim off into the current, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet but insistent whisper that maybe I still had something to give. That afternoon, I went home and found my old gardening gloves tucked beneath the workbench. I opened the drawer where I kept seed packets, tomato, basil, marigold, and let them spread over the worn wood like promises waiting to be kept. I've always believed that growth takes time, but taking that first step was all about choosing to sow again. When Nathan called a few days later, I hesitated before answering, throat tight with memories. But I heard the concern in his voice, how he'd heard about my strange friendship with the river ducks and how it reminded him of the man who used to teach him how to mend fence posts and coax life from the soil. He asked if he could visit this weekend to see the garden I'd started, and for the first time in 12 years, I felt the walls around my heart give way just a bit. I set the phone down and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That next morning, I went out in the cool dawn and planted seeds in neat rows, each one a tiny testament to the idea that life, no matter how scorched by fire or betrayal, can still push through hard earth toward the light. The neighbor across the way watched me from her porch and waved, and I returned the gesture with a nod that carried more warmth than I expected. Over the next few weeks, I found myself volunteering at the local community center, teaching teenagers how to jam and preserve their summer harvest, skills June taught me when I was barely older than they were. Their faces lit up as they learned to twist lids onto jars filled with strawberries and sugar, and I realized that sharing knowledge, even after feeling like I'd lost everything, gave me a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. Every time I saw those young faces beam with pride at their handiwork, something inside me whispered, "This is why you're still here." It wasn't a grand miracle or an earth-shattering revelation, just a series of small moments that wove themselves into a new kind of hope. I still feel the ache when July evenings roll around, and the wind whispers through the trees like a memory I can't quite shake. But now, alongside that echo of pain, there's a quieter current of optimism, a steady pulse reminding me that second chances aren't reserved for the young or the fearless. They're for anyone brave enough to reach down into the darkness, pick up the pieces, and plant seeds for a tomorrow they hope will flourish. And if a broken old man can find a purpose in untangling a duckling's fate, then maybe, just maybe, there's a new chapter waiting to be written for all of us. I sat on the edge of my bed in that little trailer one evening, the pale light of the setting sun drifting through the curtain and laying soft stripes across the warm quilt. I held in my hand an old photograph, the one of June and me on our wedding day, her dress billowing like a cloud in the breeze, my smile wide as the horizon behind us. For years I'd kept that picture tucked away, afraid that if I let its memory flood me, I'd drown in what once was. But that night, as cicadas began their lullaby outside, I felt a stirring deep inside, a whispered urging that it was time to let go of the last fragments of the man I used to be and embrace the life that still lay before me. I had carried so much anger and sorrow, a heavy pack of grief that bit my shoulders and clouded my days. I thought I needed every shard of that past, every ember of betrayal and loss, to justify the caution I learned to wear like armor. But armor weighs a man down. It keeps out the warmth along with the pain. With a deliberate breath, I peeled the photo from its brittle frame, looked at June's bright eyes, and felt an ache that was not just sadness but a gentle tug towards something cleaner, something unburdened by the weight of 12 long years. I knew then what I had to do. I carried the photo outside, where the river's murmur chased away the stillness, and laid it in the soft soil beside the single sunflower I'd planted last summer. My hands trembled, some from age, some from fear, yet I pressed the picture gently into the earth, covering it with a handful of rich loam. "You were the seed of my joy," I whispered, voice thick with tears, "and now you'll nourish something new." The act felt sacramental, a small rite of release, symbolically burying the past so it couldn't hold me captive any longer. As the last light slipped away, I stood in the cooling air and watched that sunflower nod in the fading breeze, its golden petals glowing like a promise. In that moment, a weight lifted off my heart. The sorrow didn't vanish, it never fully does, but it lost its grip, softened by the knowledge that I was choosing life over bitterness, hope over regret. I made a quiet vow to myself. I would not spend the rest of my days rehearsing the pain of betrayal or fearing the shadows of memory. I would live with my eyes open to the small wonders that still surround me, the first green shoots of spring, the laughter of children at the community garden, the solace of a neighbor's friendly wave. I resolved to let forgiveness take root, not as a gift for those who hurt me, but as a healing balm for my own soul. Forgiveness, I found, wasn't about forgetting or excusing. It was about freeing my heart to feel warmth again. The next morning, I walked down to the community center and offered to teach a canning class, something I'd never imagined doing in this part of my life. As I guided shaky hands around hot jars and gently tightened lids, I felt a quiet thrill, a sense of purpose that rippled through me like a soft current. I saw in those faces the reflection of my own younger self, eager, hopeful, unjaded, and I realized that by choosing to live fully, I was honoring June's memory in the man I once aspired to be. I still smell smoke when July winds sigh through the pines, and I will always carry the scars of what happened. But now, when that scent drifts past, I greet her with both a nod to the past and a step forward. I chose to live on, without pretense, without regret, simply on my own terms. And in doing so, I discovered a freedom I never thought possible, a lightness of being that shines brighter than any ember ever could. Looking back now, I see that the man I was before the fire carried a faith and blood ties so absolute that I never stopped to question what binds us beyond shared DNA or childhood memories, and I believed that kindness, like a seed, would always take root when planted in familiar soil. Yet through flames of betrayal and years of silent reflection by the riverbank, I learned that true connection is forged in moments of honesty and vulnerability rather than unquestioned loyalty. And that waiting for those we love to recognize our worth only binds us to a past that may no longer serve our growth. I used to think that family meant safety, that the people who shared your name must always have your back. But what I discovered is that genuine support comes from actions, not obligations. And that courage to walk away from relationships that hurt you can be the greatest act of self-respect you ever perform. I understood, sometimes painfully, that forgiveness doesn't erase the wound. It simply loosens its grip on your heart so you can keep living, choosing to carry forward the lessons rather than the bitterness. I found that healing is not a straight path but a series of small steps: planting a garden, guiding a young neighbor's hands in canning preserves, rescuing a tangled duckling, each gesture a brick in the bridge between who I was and who I can become. What helps me most now is remembering that resilience is not about hiding your scars but using them to show others that survival is possible, that the same hands that tremble from past hurt can gently tend to new life. I realize that time itself does not heal. It's what we do with that time, how we choose to invest it in growth, compassion, and purpose that matters most. For anyone listening, perhaps the truest gift you can give yourself is permission to stop waiting for reconciliation that may never come, and to start building connections where they are welcomed and reciprocated. Life has taught me that roots may hold you fast, but wings are needed if you're ever going to soar beyond the ashes of disappointment. So, if you find yourself caught between loyalty and self-preservation, know that choosing to honor your own dignity isn't betrayal, it's the beginning of a new chapter. Maybe it's time, too, to ask yourself which relationships lift you up and which hold you down, and to have the courage to let go of what no longer serves your journey toward a life defined by truth, kindness, and the gentle wisdom earned through survival. Now, dear friend, as we stand together at the close of this story, I want you to feel the warmth of a sunset's last glow settling on your shoulders, as if I were right there beside you on my old porch, passing you a mason jar of sweet tea and leaning in close to whisper one final thought. This tale isn't simply a dusty recollection of fires and betrayals long ago. It's living proof that the choices we make today can reshape the echoes of yesterday. I've walked through smoke and silence, carried grief in my bones, and learned that a man can be both broken and brave, both hurt and hopeful in the same breath. And now, I choose hope. I choose to believe that love, the truest kind, is worth waiting for and worth tending, like a garden that needs watering even when summer's sun scorches the earth. I want you to feel that same gentle optimism settling in your chest, that sense that whatever pain you've known or whatever wounds still whisper in your heart, you're not defined by them unless you let them. You have the power to plant seeds of kindness, to nurture connections that bring warmth rather than burn, and to forgive, and not because others deserve it, but because you deserve to live unburdened. Perhaps there's someone in your life you're holding on to out of habit or obligation. Maybe there's a memory you visit too often, hoping it'll feel different this time. I ask you now, is it serving you? Is it helping you grow toward the person you long to be? And here's the question I carry with me every evening as the cicadas hum and the river glints in the dying light. Do you believe that true love, the kind that withstands storms and embers, must eventually find its way back to you? Or is love something we cultivate each day, in small gestures and honest words, keeping it alive with attention rather than expecting it to return unbidden? I sometimes catch myself, long after the sun has set, imagining June, her gentle smile, the way her hand felt in mine, and I wonder if, somewhere beyond these hills and across the miles, her memory smiles back at me. I like to think she does. And maybe, just maybe, that's the sweetest proof of all, that love, when it's real, never truly leaves us. It lingers in the hush between moments, in the soft sway of sunflowers, in the kindness of a stranger's thank you, and in the courage of a man who chooses to live again. So I leave you with that thought tonight. Hold on to what lifts you up, let go of what holds you down, and ask yourself, how will you tend the garden of your own heart tomorrow? Because the story we tell ourselves becomes the life we live, and there's always room for a new chapter, no matter how many pages have already turned. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we finish, but the ones we choose to carry forward.